All right. Stephanie, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you to get started then. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the second in our series on impactful advocacy. This time, we're going to talk a little bit about how to figure out who to talk to, and then how to have a good meeting. My hope is that this information will that it will be a good lead-in. I know AIA Ohio has their Hill Day coming up here coming up soon in a few weeks, I think. So my hope is that this info will kind of lead naturally into that and help sort of augment whatever training AIA Ohio makes available for those who are participating in that lobby day. So again, just a quick agenda. We're going to talk about something called power mapping, reaching out to folks in the community and building coalitions, who to talk to as far as lawmakers and regulators, and then how to have a good meeting, how to prep for it, and sort of what the follow-up looks like and all of that. So let's dive right into power mapping, finding and building connections. So first of all, the idea behind power mapping is to identify the folks who have power or who are the key decision makers in the community, within the legislature, on regulatory boards, on city council. So essentially finding the folks who have influence over the issues that you care about, or have influence over the people who influence the issues that you care about. Power mapping can be a really good strategic and organized way of determining who you can build coalitions with, who you'd be and who you could be working to build relationships with around your issues. And so some of the questions you want to ask, again, who has power? Who are the key decision makers? Who or what influences those people? And then also who in the community is affected by the issue? Because the folks that are affected by whatever the issue is that you're working on, or the policy that you're working on, they can have a really powerful voice with legislators and with folks on city council and people like that. So I always like to share this little diagram. It's very simple, but can be a really powerful and useful tool. And ideally, it's meant to be done for each decision maker that you identify. So it can kind of be a lot, but again, it's a really useful tool. And the idea is to identify a decision maker, or the person who has influence over the issue that you're working on. And they go at the very top. I wish I had a laser pointer so that I could kind of point to the top. But so you identify that person, you put them at the very top of this diagram, and you put them to the left or to the right based on whether, to the best of your knowledge, they are already kind of on your side of the issue, or if they're not. And so it's just a really quick visual way to kind of gauge where a particular decision maker is on this scale of being with you or against you around a particular issue. In the other four quadrants, those are meant for the other people and the other organizations you identify who are already working on this issue. And it's good to track both, not just the people and organizations who are working on the issue from your perspective, either not just the folks that share your position, but also the folks that are either neutral or are working, have the opposite position on that particular issue. And so the idea is that, say, for example, you identify a nonprofit organization that's really active around a particular policy issue that you want to work on. They would go on this power mapping diagram. If they have a lot of influence with the particular decision maker that you are focused on, then they would go in the top half of this diagram. And the more influence they have, the higher they go up the diagram. If they support your position, then they go over on the with us side. And if they don't, then of course they go over on the against us side. And so the idea is that by the time you identify, if you go through this process and identify a handful of organizations and people who are engaged on this issue or on this policy, that you end up with a visual representation of sort of the political reality around this particular issue. And it gives you a very clear sense of who you can build coalitions with, who you can work with, and who is essentially working, not working against you, because that makes it sound like it's like they're directly, like it's targeted towards you. But it gives you an idea of the folks who are on the other side of the issue. And then the other good thing is that if you end up identifying people or organizations that have influence over the decision maker that you focused on, but who are essentially neutral on the issue, you know that those are people that can potentially be won over to your side of the issue. And so it gives you a way to start building a little bit of a strategy around a particular policy or issue by identifying these folks, figuring out how influential they are, and sort of where they are on the map in terms of whether they share your position or whether they don't. So communities and coalitions, I always call this finding your people, because that's really what we're talking about, is identifying people and organizations that you can build strong coalitions and working relationships with, people and organizations who are already working on the issue. When you find people or organizations, that the best first thing to do is research their previous work. And especially with organizations, a lot of that can be found on their website. Go to their website. Most organizations who do advocacy work have either a government relations or an advocacy tab on their website. And you can go there and just read, some of the things that they've done. Have they done email campaigns? Do they organize a day, either a day on the Hill, for the Ohio State Legislature, or are they specifically working in Cincinnati? And kind of look for, points of connection where you all might be able to do things together. See if you can find out who's running the campaign, see if there's any contact information for somebody that you could reach out to and at least start talking to about the issue. See if you can figure out where you agree or disagree. And again, it's a little bit easier with organizations because a lot of them have position statements and policies around, specific issues. AIA, as I'm sure most of you know, we have policies and positions on a range of issues. And if you can find that, it gives you insight into, again, those common connection points, the areas where you can work on things together. I'm going to set expectations. Nobody that you find, whether it's an organization or a person, is likely to be 100% in your camp. They're even with organizations that are working on similar issues, you will have things you can work on together, and there will be things that there will be points where you just simply disagree. It's just sort of the nature of things, and I don't think anyone here is surprised by that or has unrealistic expectations in terms of how much agreement you think there will be. But I feel like it's always just worth acknowledging that even with the organizations or the people that you build coalitions with, there will be some navigating that has to happen around areas of disagreement. And with that in mind, it's one of the reasons that it's really important to have an understanding of sort of what you can live with. Where are you willing to maybe compromise on some things if there are areas of disagreement. And by the same token, what are the non-starters for you? What are the areas that are not up for negotiation as far as you're concerned. Having a good sense of that going into these conversations will just help them be more productive. And it isn't meant to kind of set up the conversation to be contentious, but just to be as informative as possible for everybody who's involved in the conversation, so that you all have a good idea of where everybody stands and, you know, why to a certain degree, because that's always helpful to understand as well. And so you have a really clear picture of the things that you can work on together. And another great place to find your people, as I call it, is to talk to your colleagues. You all are already subject matter experts in certain areas where your where your profession is concerned. Your colleagues are the same way. And so it's possible that you have colleagues who are subject matter experts on a particular issue or policy area that you care about and that you're passionate about, but about which you're not an expert. So, talk to your colleagues, find out what they work on, what they, kind of what they're passionate about as far as, policy issues and things like that. And, see if there are any that you can kind of bring into that kind of coalition. So identifying lawmakers and regulators, this one can be, this can require a little bit more legwork. So the first thing that you want to do when especially if you're trying to build a campaign around a particular policy or issue, is to find your champions. And again, it takes a little bit more research, looking at things like social media posts, floor speeches, previous legislation that's been either authored by or co-sponsored by a lawmaker. And a lot of that information is available on the Ohio legislature, website. You can find texts for, floor speeches and things like that. Finding lawmakers, city councilors, regulators who speak favorably about your issue, and again, have either authored or sponsored supportive legislation, is the first step towards identifying the folks who can be the champions of your issues. And then the next thing that you want to do, once you've identified those legislators, you want to try to find the right staff. Legislative staff, generally speaking, are assigned specific policy portfolios. It's a little bit different at the state level because state legislators may only have one or two legislative staff, or they may not have any. And again, that's where, it just takes a little bit of research to kind of identify if there are staff people, and if so, what are they responsible for? Some of the info might be online. I did a little looking on the Ohio legislature website, and it looks like, as far as contact information for both the Ohio Senate and Ohio representatives, you have phone numbers, and then the only other way to contact people is through an online form that you fill out. But if there's a phone number, again, it's a quick way to try to identify the people that you want to be having these conversations with. Just call up the office and say, hey, I'm really interested in this particular issue. I'd like to talk to somebody in your office who has sort of legislative responsibility, or who has responsibility for that particular policy area. Can you tell me who that is? And usually they're very willing to share that information, and either to help you set up a meeting, or to sort of walk you through what their process is for people requesting meetings. Sometimes you can do it right over the phone. A lot of offices these days seem to prefer that those requests go through the online form, like you see on the slide here. And it's different from office to office. It just sort of depends on what their preference is. One thing that I have learned over the years is that you're likely to get a meeting scheduled more quickly if you follow their preferred process. And it's simply because they have systems set up for expediting those kinds of requests within whatever their preferred process is. And so if you follow that process, it just means that you'll get a meeting scheduled that much faster. And then, of course, once you have a meeting scheduled with someone, you want to make sure that it's a really good meeting. And there are a few steps that you can take to make sure that that happens. Before the meeting, you want to be sure that you're well prepared. Practice your pitch. And also send them information ahead of time. If you can get an email address, and let them know that, you've got a couple of pieces of information that you'd like to send them before the meeting so that they've got time to look at it. I know the sort of conventional, the standard way of doing it is going to a meeting with what are called leave behinds, having a little packet of information that you leave with the legislator or with their staff person. But what we're finding is that for a lot of legislators and legislative staff, their preference is actually to get that information before the meeting so that they've got time to read through it and kind of get up to speed on whatever the issue is that you want to talk about so that you can have a more productive conversation. You can still take hard copies of those things and leave them at the end of the meeting. But if you have a way to send them ahead of time, it's a really good way to just kind of increase the likelihood that you'll have a more productive meeting. You want to practice, if at all possible, do some role playing with somebody, have them be the legislative staff or the legislator, and just kind of run through your pitch, talk about what the issue is, why you care about it, how constituents are affected by the issue, and what your ask is. And practice it a few times. I mean, I still, to this day, if I have a meeting with a legislator, I'll sit down with my spouse or with a friend and talk through what it is talk through all of the things that I want to say to make sure that I can do it not only in a way that's concise, but in a way that's clear, and make sure that I don't inadvertently kind of go off on rabbit trails, which I can be prone to do if I'm not well prepared. So take the time, to practice the things that you want to say and practice your ask. And this is a good time too to think about possible compromises that you might be willing to consider around the particular issue, because again, it's part of it's just the reality. It's the reality of policy making, is that there are always compromises, and generally speaking, nobody gets everything that they want. And so have in mind what you're willing to live without in these conversations, and also have in mind, again, the things that are non-negotiable for you, and have really good reasons why. Because that's going to be important to the people that you're talking to, for them to understand why a particular aspect of this issue is non-negotiable for you. And having that kind of conversation, you may be able to bring to light some information that either a perspective they hadn't considered or information that they hadn't been aware of. So it is okay to go in and say, this aspect of this issue is something that I'm not willing to negotiate on or change, and here are the reasons why. But then again, have some things that you are willing to sort of negotiate on, and maybe have some wiggle room on some things too. Be willing to kind of go through that give and take process. During the meeting, and I think we may have talked about this before, but be brief, be clear about your ask, and be respectful. In most cases, any meeting that you have is going to be 15 to 20 minutes, maybe half an hour at the most, because legislators and legislative staff are they're so busy. And 15 to 20 minutes is generally the time that they allocate for these types of meetings. And so again, that's where, sort of practicing your pitch. It's one of the reasons that doing that is so important, because you want to be sure that you get to the thing that is the purpose of the meeting. And the best way to do that is to practice, so that when you actually sit down and meet with the lawmaker or their staff, you can get to the point. It doesn't mean that you can't, start out with some chit chat, especially if you find that you have some things in common. If you, are from the same hometown or went to the same high school, or your kids go to the same elementary school together or something like that, those points of contact can be a really good way to start building relationships with these lawmakers and their staff. So it's okay to take a couple of minutes, but make sure it's only a couple minutes, because again, they're really pressed for time, and you're there to talk about an issue that's important to you. So make sure you've got time to talk about that issue too. Be clear again about the things that you want and why. And again, be clear about where you're sort of willing to negotiate and where you're not. And of course, I feel like it goes without saying with this crowd, but be respectful. I mean, you guys all know that. And at the same time, I feel like it always bears repeating, because lawmakers and their staff, they get beat up a lot. They get yelled at a lot. They hear from people who are not happy. And not that you can't convey. I mean, if you're meeting with a legislator who has a position on an issue that you disagree with, it is okay to express your disappointment, or to just say, I disagree with your position. But there are respectful ways to do that, right? There are respectful ways to say, I've noticed that you've either made these comments or you've voted this way, and here's why that's concerning for me. Let me tell you a little bit about sort of my perspective on this issue, and maybe share some information that maybe you don't have. And so being respectful doesn't mean you have to agree, but you can disagree and still be respectful of one another. So keep that in mind too. And then after the meeting, send a quick thank you. Again, hopefully, if you have an email, by that time, you should have an email address. Generally speaking, if you go into a meeting with legislative staff, one of the first things they'll do is hand you their business card, which usually has an email address on it. If they don't, ask if they have an email address that you can use to send additional information and things like that, and also just for purposes of following up. And then just send them a quick thank you. It can be just 2 lines. Thanks so much for taking time to meet with me. I look forward to continued conversations, or something like that. If they ask questions that you don't have answers to, it's a great opportunity to follow up. And it's one of the myths that I try to dispel with folks is this idea that you have to go in with all the answers. Not only do you not have to have all the answers, but it's really good if they ask you something that you don't know the answer to, because then you have the perfect excuse to follow up and stay in touch with that lawmaker or with that staff person. So follow up with those answers as quickly as you've got them, and then stay in touch. Continue to follow up, especially if you had a specific ask. If you were asking them to sponsor a piece of legislation, or to help get a committee hearing scheduled or something like that. Follow up once a week or once every couple of weeks, and just kind of see where the process is. Make sure that the issue doesn't get forgotten in sort of the flurry of all the other activity that they have going on. And make sure that they know, again, that this is an issue that's important to you, and that you're gonna keep asking about. And so that concludes my presentation. Thank you guys for your attention, and I will pause now to see if there are any questions. I think we have about 5 minutes left in our time together, 5-6 minutes. So if anybody has any questions, and I'm going to stop sharing too, so we can all see each other.
We have a small group, so if you just want to unmute and ask, please feel free. But if you are more comfortable using the chat, go ahead and do that too.
You covered it all, Stephanie. Again, I just want a quick comment, and then if there's questions that people think about, again, just do appreciate the time. These are nice,
for sure.
Nice. I think it was a good follow-up for those who were on maybe last week. Just a reminder too, for those on the, if you haven't already, sign up. There's a Ohio brief on Thursday at noon by the AI Ohio, kind of preparation for legislation day next Tuesday. If you get an opportunity, even if have been up there before, I'm gonna encourage you to listen to some of the briefs at the state level, be prepared, like Stephanie said, if you're going on that following Tuesday. So that'll be good opportunities to see what's going on at the State House that may apply to some things here in Cincinnati as well. So
Yeah. And I'll send the slide deck along to Julie, so that you can share with everybody. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, if you think of any, by all means, don't hesitate to reach out. I feel like I threw a lot at you between the power mapping and the prepping for meetings and all of that. I would highly encourage you all, just kind of as a quick sort of parting thought, to dig into power mapping a little bit more. I mean, I did sort of a quick overview, but power mapping is a thing that we could do an entire hour-long presentation on something like power mapping, and it can be a really powerful tool for identifying the people and the organizations that you can work with on a particular issue. And also to identify lawmakers who are also working on the issue and that you might be able to work with.
Hey, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Question about that, because I'd love to see the slideshow. If you had an example, one of those, I think it's pretty self-explanatory on how you're putting the people on there. But if you had one that doesn't break any kind of confidentiality, you could show an example, one of those along with the slideshow. I'd love to see something like that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I can absolutely put together some examples of some power mapping that I've done in the past that might help. Kind of might help show how it works. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Any other questions? We've got 3 whole minutes.
No, but I just want to say thank you. I have to take off here, but thanks. I'm enjoying the series here. The short, condensed versions broken out here. Half hour
That's
seems to
great.
be perfect for subject matter here. So
Awesome.
I'll see you at the next one.
Cool. Thanks for being here.
All right, I did put links in the chat for the programs. Oh, and everybody's taken off. All right, well, that's great.